everybody out there in Bourbon Real Talk land. Randy Sullivan coming to you today with some special information from a special guest. We have Spencer Whelan from the Texas Whiskey Association with us, and they have some very exciting, well, we'll call it an initiative that they're working on, and he's going to share some information about that. And if you are a spirits lover in general, even if it's not just whiskey, if you're a spirits lover in general and you love small business, you're going to be very excited about what the Texas Whiskey Association is working on. So Spencer, welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about this initiative. What is the name of it?
So the name of it is the StillStrongTX campaign, or hashtag StillStrongTX. So if you're looking on the internet, you'll find the hashtag StillStrongTX, and you can see everything that's kind of been associated with that. This is actually the second iteration of this campaign. So during that first phase of the StillStrongTX campaign, it was all about sending letters to the governor saying, hey, we're going to need help, right? We're going to need help from the state. Please do an executive order that allows us to sell more than 2 bottles at the distillery, allow us to ship to the consumers who would otherwise come and visit us in person, and allow us to sell on Sundays and sell 7 days a week, because, you know, at this point we need any sale that we can muster, even
Right.
if it's curbside.
Right.
So that was the first effort. This second effort is as a result of the June 26th executive order that basically shut down the entire alcohol service industry, right?
Yeah.
It shut down bars, it shut down distilleries, wineries, breweries. The 51% rule became a thing that never was in place before for distilleries.
Mm-hmm.
So that shutdown has been the most persistent one. And even though they say now you can have food service to reopen your distillery, if you're making less than 51% alcohol sales, then basically what that's telling distilleries is you have to open up another line of business.
Right.
You have to become a restaurateur in addition to a distillery and a tourism spot in order to have an operating facility.
Right.
So that's not an option for most of the distilleries, especially in this environment.
Sure.
So this campaign is intended to bring money into a political action committee that will allow us to have more of a ground game so that the lawmakers in this state can understand the extreme unique challenges that distilleries face.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, I have been seeing reports that alcohol sales are actually up as a result of COVID. And so why would the distilleries be struggling at all?
It's a great question. And that is a common, I don't want to say a misconception, because it's true across the board that alcohol sales are up, especially delivery alcohol sales. So, you know, delivery apps like Drizzly, and I don't want to pick on Drizzly, but lots of them, you know, all the delivery apps out there, they've seen increase of spirit sales like 200 to 300%, right? Because people are looking for contactless ways to have alcohol delivered to their homes instead of going to a liquor store or going to wherever they usually buy their product.
Right.
That is true. However, what is not being told in that statistic is that almost all of those sales are happening on brands with national branding presence. You know who they are. They're the large international brands of Scotch, bourbon, Tennessee whiskeys. Those products, vodkas, those products are all available almost everywhere. And the other part of this that's not told is that when you order from a delivery app, what's happening is you're making an order. That order is going to your local liquor store, and the liquor store is delivering it to the customer in a contactless manner.
Right.
So it's dependent on whether or not that product is distributed to the local area where you live. That's where you're going to see that inventory. Most of the Texas distilling industry is less than 13 years old, right? And the vast majority of it is younger than 10 years old, right? So those brands that have not been around that long, one, don't have mass distribution, even within the state of Texas, let alone the nation. And two, they don't have the marketing budgets to do the kind of brand awareness campaigns that large international and national brands have.
Mm-hmm.
So while they may be seeing, well, the large national brands may be seeing 200 to 300% increases at this time. The younger brands, or the craft brands, are seeing 60 to 80% drop off of their revenue.
Wow.
We just did a survey of the distilleries that are registered with StillStrongTX, the campaign that we're running. And the latest numbers are that 58% of the distilleries that were surveyed as a part of this campaign have seen a decrease of 60 to 80% revenue loss since COVID.
That is astonishing.
Yeah.
So it sounds like and maybe people just don't think about this, but it sounds like large national brands go about generating revenue through a completely different process than these smaller craft brands. Is that fair to say? How would you characterize the difference in how the craft brands generate revenue?
Yeah, the craft brands generate revenue primarily through distillery sales and distillery visits. So they are, for lack of a better term, a tourist stop that has a pretty significant production and manufacturing capability and a tasting room. So they're already kind of running three businesses as is. They have a tasting room. They have tourist type things where they're selling T-shirts and merchandise and things that you would typically find in a tourism activity. They also have a production capacity, and that back of house production capacity is in many cases being sold through distributors. But as much as they can sell through distributors is only relevant to how well known their brand is.
Right.
Right. So, at the Texas Whiskey Association, our subsidiary company is the Texas Whiskey Trail. And that was formed specifically to address this problem because we knew that people wanted to do tourism activities. We knew that people wanted to go visit and travel around the state and find interesting things like they already do with Texas wineries. So we kind of adopted that model and tried to gamify the process of going to visiting distilleries. And in the process, you become more aware of their brands. Then when you go back home, you call your liquor store and say, hey, I can't get XYZ brand that I visited on the Whiskey Trail. Why not? And that therefore increases demand to hopefully get them to make more sales through traditional distribution networks, right?
So people can understand, let's say that a distillery does $100,000 a month and they've lost $60,000 a month in the tourism sales. Right. If they were to be able to replace that $60,000 with sales that they were generating through the 3-tier system, would that fix the problem? Is that equivalent for them?
No, it's not. And I'll tell you why. Because those distilleries that receive those sales at the distillery, that money goes directly to the distillery. There's no multi-step process in multiple organizations and middle organizations that are taking cuts from the product that they produce, bottle, and sell. All that money that goes to the distillery goes directly to the distillery, and oftentimes goes directly to pay employees, because that's oftentimes where the revenue is realized is in employee sales, and obviously paying taxes and things like that to the state of Texas, paying energy bills, which are significant at a distillery. And then, all of those things are where they take revenue directly from consumers in visits, and they pay those bills first, right?
Gotcha.
Versus, if you're passing it through distribution, there's obviously more hands that are touching the product, more people who are taking a percentage, and that revenue may not be realized completely like the way it is realized at the distillery.
Gotcha.
So, and there's also combination things, right? So some distilleries will sell chocolates along with their whiskey. They'll sell T-shirts. They'll sell glassware. Another example of this is when Garrison Brothers was getting started, they almost existed on nothing but T-shirt sales to get their distillery going until they had product that was available to sell. So these distilleries have figured out lots of diverse methods in which to make their business operate, but it's not all directly related to the sale of the bottle that they produce. But when they do sell a bottle at a distillery, it has a much bigger impact on their bottom line than if it was distributed elsewhere.
So if logic follows, then that means that losing distillery sales is a lot bigger deal to these small businesses than it would be if they lost a sale through the three-tier system. One, because they lose more revenue that actually goes in their pocket, and two, they lose the opportunity to cross-sell and capitalize off of that one visit multiple times. And so it sounds like that for small distilleries, the very worst thing that could happen would be a pandemic that made it illegal for people to come buy their products at their facility.
Yeah, it's literally a perfect storm of, it's a perfect storm of things, right? It's a perfect storm of 100-year-old laws that have existed basically since Prohibition. Those laws, when repealed, got modified, and we're existing under most of those laws today. Or not most, but we're existing under a lot of those laws today still, or at least they're impacting the laws that we still have on the books. So there's those things that have been exposed by the pandemic. There are the issues of people just not wanting to go travel long distances, travel to a distillery, because they are afraid of travel, right? That's just, and they're being told by local governments to not travel and not leave your city.
Right.
So that's from a tourism perspective, it's a perfect storm.
Right.
Then you actually have the sanitizer level thrown into it, where a lot of distilleries like voluntarily closed their tours, their tasting rooms, and their back of house operations because they wanted to keep those areas sanitized for the production of hand sanitizer. They didn't want anybody out there that was unauthorized bringing in COVID and touching surfaces and things like that. So they voluntarily stepped back, and even when some of them were allowed to reopen during that small period of time in late May and June, a lot of them decided not to, so that they could continue to produce sanitizer in a proper way. Gotcha. So all of those things have compounded upon themselves in a very short period of time, relatively 5 months, where the past 13 years of work building an industry could be destroyed within 5 to 6 months if we don't take care of this soon.
Wow. So for the pure capitalist out there that just says like, hey, business finds a way. If we lose some of the distilleries, who cares? Like, won't it work itself out in time? What do you say to that logic?
Well, I say to that logic, if you believe in a free market, you should believe in the ability for small businesses to operate the way they need to operate. And these small businesses are operating with handcuffs on. They simply are operating on different rules than people within their own sector. I mean, we love our brothers and sisters in wine and beer, but wine is allowed to ship. Beer and spirits are not allowed to ship. You can buy a significant amount of bottles at a winery when you visit, and you can join their club, and you can have things shipped to you on a regular basis. Breweries are allowed to have a case per person per 30 or per day. You can go to a brewery and buy a case of beer every day if you wanted to. But if you're a distillery, you can only sell to a person one time, or sorry, 2 bottles per person per 30 days, right? So you basically get one sale, one shot at that person to sell them your core product every 30 days. If they come back, then you might get another chance to do it again. But you can't get your product out especially during a pandemic, you can't ship samples to people so that they can try your product and then order it through the traditional 3-tier system that they're familiar with. You can't market very well if you don't have the funds to market yourself. So all of those things are compounding at the same time. So I'd say if you're a free market person, you need to look at all of the restrictions that have been specifically imposed on this one small segment and realize that this small segment has excelled in spite of those over the past 10 years. And now the one thing that they were really excelling at, which was getting people to their distillery, tasting their amazing products, and then calling for them in the market, that's being taken away. So all this was kind of the final lock of the handcuff is, well, what can we do? We produce sanitizer. we can't sell sanitizer now that the industrial market has caught up to demand.
Right.
So that part is gone for them as well. Every real option of revenue is being stripped away from distilleries unless you have massive distribution and massive marketing dollars.
So what's the goal of the hashtag StillStrongTX initiative, and how would it fix these problems?
So the goal is threefold. We don't want to see, we want to see a future in which distilleries are not handcuffed by the restrictions that they have on them today, which are, I'm sorry, but they're antiquated and they're arbitrary. Like there doesn't seem to be a lot of science or reasoning behind some of these rules, right? But what we want is, we want to take three items that are important. One is where we can sell the products, where people want to receive them, how we can sell it, and how much of it they can sell per transaction, and when they can sell it. So we're asking the governor to do three things: remove the restrictions that prevent distilleries from shipping frankly a limited number of bottles, because let's be frank, it's going to cost money for shipping costs. It's going to be a more expensive purchase. So those people that want those products are actually actively seeking it. So get the people who want the products the most and want to support these distilleries an option to receive it in the same way that they can ship wine today, right? Allow that to happen. That means shipping and delivery, because those are two different things, but they're joined, right? You need to be able to ship and be able to deliver to people where they are. Two, take away the bottle limits and allow them to set, if somebody is willing to travel all the way to a distillery, and even though the tasting room is closed, sit outside their car and have bottles delivered to their car, the distilleries need to have the ability to sell more than 2 bottles to those people who come and visit them. And they should be able to sell pretty much an unlimited amount. If you go to a liquor store, you can buy as many bottles as you want right now. And in many cases, you can buy them contactless where you're sitting in the parking lot, right? So at least give the distillers the same retail option of their own product at the distillery. And then an adjunct to that is, on Sundays, if people are traveling to a distillery, they're probably going to travel on a Friday, a Saturday, or Sunday. So by not having 7-day sales where they can sell their product any day to anybody who wants it, you're restricting, or at least taking a third out of their weekend where they can't operate and sell something, even if somebody does show up. And that's, it's really common sense stuff. It's take the handcuffs off that allow them to make revenue in a contactless and safe way, and doesn't encourage people to come and hang out at a bar-like environment. Tasting rooms are not bar-like in their function. People go and sit and taste a small sampling of things. They usually don't drink that much. They're tasting. That's why they call them tasting rooms, not get drunk rooms. So the environment is going to depend on people looking at these laws in a common sense way and saying, you need to let these folks operate. They did something to help our state. Now we need to help them. And then long term, we'll work with the legislature to change these laws into a common sense way. But right now, we need help from the governor to take this action on and say these people deserve help. Same way he did with cocktails to go.
Okay, so he has taken some actions like this as a result of COVID to try and help some other industries.
That's exactly correct.
What has he done so far?
So restaurants who have been hit hard as well. There's no doubt about how restaurants have been hit hard, right? But they also are a significantly larger employment base, and they're a significantly larger and longer lasting industry. There's been restaurants as long as we've been around as a state. So it's a long-standing and important industry to the state. So they have more lobbying power, just flat out. They have more power to talk and be heard to legislators and the government. So they were able to lobby and say, we need to be able to get alcohol sales in addition to our food sales. We have the ability to deliver food. We have the ability to put it out curbside. We need to be able to do cocktails with that. And the governor agreed. And I think it's a smart decision. It allowed people to get cocktails along with their meals. and it gave a lifeline to a lot of employees who work at restaurants. So this has been done. There is the delivery of alcohol happening on a daily basis across the state of Texas. And it's either happening from a liquor store where you can get a full bottle delivered to you, or it's happening where a cocktail is delivered to you from a restaurant. And
Right.
at first it was cocktail kits where the liquor and the cocktail elements were packaged separately. Now restaurants can pour it and seal it and deliver it with it.
Mm.
So, but distilleries do not have that right still. They can't do cocktails to go. They can't do delivery. They can't do shipping. They're still restricted.
Mm. So my understanding is that after Prohibition, the federal government basically said, we're washing our hands of alcohol laws. Every state has to do their own thing. Are there other states that have a regulatory environment similar to what you're asking the Texas governor to create?
Yes. And
Okay.
so I think there were 6 or 8 states, I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, before COVID that did allow this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a large number of states in the United States. Now, since that, roughly the same number have allowed direct-to-consumer shipping since COVID, since
Mm-hmm.
March. And some of those states include, I think, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York State, California, Washington State, and Oregon. But most notably is the state of Kentucky.
Gotcha.
So Kentucky is the largest distilling state in the union, obviously, and they now have the right to ship directly from a distillery to consumers around the country that are allowed to receive it. So
Gotcha.
they actually passed, I believe, in 2018, a law that allowed for delivery clubs. So if you visited a distillery, you could join a club, and then you could have things shipped to you after you were part of that club. Now you can. Now, since COVID, they've modified that, and the law exists where you're allowed to ship directly from a distillery.
Gotcha.
So it's obvious that when you look at the largest tourism state for distillery tourism, Kentucky, and the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, and the largest distilling state as an industry, most of which is through distribution, by the way, they were allowed to ship. So
Right.
if it is that important to the large distilleries who still have massive distribution, it should be as equal, as valuable, if not more so, to the small distilleries that are just getting started.
Right.
And Texas has the best bourbon in the world currently, but we can't ship it
Right.
outside of our state. We had the, I think 2013's best single malt in the world, but that can't be shipped.
Right.
We are winning awards left and right to show that Texas whiskey is making an impact on the global stage. So people are aware of the brands on a global and national basis, but they don't have the ability to receive it.
Mm-hmm.
And getting it through the traditional distribution and retail channels is not going to happen right now during the pandemic. It takes months to do distribution agreements. It takes months to get into retailers and build up your brand presence. So it is vitally important that these distillers have some kind of a lifeline to make revenue right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, because when you think about the way that the traditional retail distribution system works, it's very safe for that retailer to bring in large quantities of, Tennessee whiskey or Kentucky bourbon from well-known brands, because
Yes.
they can put that on that shelf and they know that inventory is going to turn. But if a distillery really busts their tail and draws in some tourists, and one of them, lives in Wichita Falls, and one of them lives in Corpus Christi, and one of them lives in El Paso or whatever, those local retail partners are not going to all of a sudden start bringing in the product for that one customer. And so
That's right.
I would imagine that every one of these craft producers has a database of people that have signed up for their newsletter or bought a product while they were there. And it would be a huge lifeline to be able to send an email to all of those raving fans that are too spread out to get their alcohol through the regular distribution channel and say, hey, we can now ship to you. Right.
Yes.
And all they would be doing is monetizing a relationship that currently cannot be serviced right? I don't even think it would take away from anything that was already going on.
I don't
With
either.
the retailers and whatnot. I mean, the retailers and the wholesalers right now are running around like their hair's on fire because they're just trying to keep up with the demand of the major brands that all of a sudden sales are up by a significant percentage. And there's some shifting that's had to go on too, because some retail partners relied heavily on restaurants and obviously their orders are down. But most of those have had an offset and an increase in revenue through regular customer sales. But this just seems like it makes so much sense just to allow a business to sell its product to the customers they already have a relationship with that they can't get to without this change of the law. So what's the argument against it?
I don't know what the argument against it is from a public perspective, from a public policy perspective. I do not understand any
Okay.
argument against this at this time. It really is such a common sense thing that I find it extremely hard to argue. Now, of course, people are going to say when you get into a shipping debate, it's like, okay, well, how do you know that kids aren't going to get their hands on it?
Mhm.
There's a solution for that, right? Kind of like there's an app for that.
Right, right.
There are ways now for there to be databases to say, okay, this address is, this person ordered from this address. They verified that they're this old, but we've already solved this problem in the wine industry, right?
Gotcha.
Wine shippers have a wine shipping permit. They can ship to a state. It comes in a box that's sealed, and it says contains alcohol, must be 21 years or older to sign for delivery. So
Hmm.
it requires an age verification, just like you would at a bar, where it's like, okay, you knock on the door, it's not going to be delivered unless there's a person there with an ID that makes sure that that is age verified, right? So it's the same basic process of verifying somebody's age as you would at a bar or a liquor store or anything like that. So I don't think that argument really holds water, because let's face it, everybody's shipping everything to their house right now.
Right.
Amazon's profits are up, God knows how much, and people are able to ship very dangerous things today to their house that do not require age verification,
Sure.
right? Things like detergents and detergent pods and things like that. Like all of those things are being shipped to people's homes
Or
right
Tylenol.
now.
Bottle of
Right,
Tylenol.
Tylenol. That's a perfect example, right? It seems innocuous, but it could very easily harm a child as well, right?
Sure.
But alcohol, because of prohibition, let's
Hmm.
face it, and because of the history of alcohol in the United States, still has a stain of history associated with it. And that stain of history has persisted for 100 years.
Hmm.
We have moved past that. And the internet has shown consumers that there's an amazing spirit being made in Texas. There's an amazing spirit being made in Virginia. There's an amazing spirit, the new distillery being made in Scotland. I want to get my hands on that. How do I do it?
Right.
And the separation between the consumer and the producer has been bridged.
Right.
It used to be that the only way that you knew about a distillery existing was if their product was on a shelf
Right.
when you visited a liquor store. That no longer exists. So now consumers are saying, why can't I have this delivered to me? Why do I have to drive 500 miles to visit a distillery to pick up 2 bottles every 30 days?
Right.
Especially during a pandemic. So none of those arguments really make sense right now. Those arguments are they're red herrings to the bigger
Gotcha.
issue.
That makes sense. So, normally alcohol is sold by the producer to a wholesaler, and then the wholesaler gets it out to retail stores. And so, would we anticipate, or maybe a better question would be, in the states that have already made these changes, have the wholesale businesses and retailers, have they been negatively affected in any major way by
I
these
don't
changes?
I don't have specific data on that, so I don't want to conjecture, but I
Uh-huh.
can tell you that the data that is coming out for craft distilleries is showing that they're able to maintain some level of stability for their business by
Hmm.
having that ability to ship, right? So places like Virginia, which is a control state, and if for those of your viewers who don't know what a control state is, that means that the government itself manages the liquor stores.
Right.
So if you're in Virginia and you want to buy a bottle of liquor, you have to go to a Virginia ABC store or a VABC store and buy it from a government-owned or government-managed facility. They have opened up direct-to-consumer shipping, and it's helping those distillers in the state of Virginia. Right?
So we know it would help. The way I've always thought about this, because the reality is the reason why there is a 2-bottle limit is because more powerful forces than our little bitty craft distillery market wanted to limit it, because they wanted to make sure that they were not going to be cut out of the process, the wholesalers and the retailers. But my concern is for the retailers and the wholesalers too, because we do barrel picks in some would say whiskey. And one of the things that we have to have a conversation about every time we decide whether or not we're going to select a barrel is, are we going to hurt the wholesaler and the retailer by not being able to move these bottles, right? Because inventory just sitting there on the shelves for a retailer is a problem. And when a retailer, in the case of a barrel pick, asks the wholesaler to bring in product and then they won't order it because it's not moving off of their shelves and the inventory is sitting in the wholesaler's inventory, that hurts the wholesaler. And it damages the relationship between the wholesaler and the producer and the wholesaler and the retailer. And so I've always looked at craft in that same way, like a barrel pick, in that, you know, we have laws in place that we're forcing that retailer to take on that risk to satisfy the customers that the producer was able to create through tourism or whatever it was that they did, if they did a tasting someplace. And we asked that retailer, like, hey, take on this risk, order this product that quite frankly is probably more expensive than your regular brand line products that you keep on the shelves. Order this inventory and let it sit here and just see whether or not there's enough people to come in and buy it. And my thought was, if we could allow the distilleries to start servicing the few clients that they had in different areas, they'll become almost brand ambassadors for those craft distilleries in those areas. And then it'll become safer for that retail partner to start bringing that product in, because people, when they want their alcohol, they want their alcohol. They don't want to have to wait for it to be shipped.
That's right.
They still want to go to the retail store and pick it up the day that they know that they need it. But this actually might make it, it might make it better for the wholesaler and the retailer, because it would grow that brand's awareness without them having to take on the risk and the responsibility of becoming the salespeople for that brand. And through that process, we could get revenue into these struggling businesses, while at the same time strengthening the demand for their products, so that the wholesale partners that they've been, that have been there for them from the beginning, because they can't sell anything without a wholesale partner. So every one of these craft distilleries has a strong relationship with their wholesaler. And this is a way for them to make that relationship more valuable for that wholesaler. And that's why I hope this goes through, because it's going to have a big impact. And I can tell you that when they changed the law for shipping for wine in Fredericksburg, which is the second largest wine tourist destination location in the United States, next to Napa Sonoma. You saw the number of wineries like quadruple over the next few years, because investors were able to put money in those businesses, and they knew that they had a way to monetize that investment, because they could sell direct to the consumer. And so I think that we could do a whole lot with this change, not only save these businesses, but potentially attract fresh capital, which is going to grow the Texas economy, create more tax revenues for the state, more employment, and also in the long term, make it a whole lot better for the wholesaler and the retailer to be able to safely bring these products in. So,
well, let me give a potential scenario here. Okay. So today, about 1%, I think this is according to the Texas Distilled Spirits Association. I think today about 1% of direct-to-consumer alcohol sales are done at a distillery, right?
Okay.
So I mean, it's such a minor part of the grand scheme here that we're talking about a very small percentage, but that 1% matters so much to the distilleries that are part of that sale, right? So imagine, if you will, a scenario in which, okay, they're allowed to ship a certain number of bottles, or even a limited number of bottles once it becomes a more, like Kentucky has a limit of, I think, liters is what they're allowed to ship per customer, right? So if you're allowed to ship at all, what is that doing? Well, that's increasing demand for certain brands. It's also providing data back, right? You can say, hey, look, we've had a whole bunch of deliveries or a whole bunch of shipping orders from the south side of Chicago, or from the east side of Boston, or, the west side of Boston, or whatever it is, right? They can look at where the shipping data is and say, you know what, there might be a hot spot where people really want to get this product.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? The distillery is probably not going to work too hard to make their shipping operation so robust that they can fulfill a whole bunch of orders to that area specifically, right? Who are they going to go through? They're going to go through their wholesaler.
Sure.
They're going to say, we have data that shows that this product is popular in this area. We have data that's showing that people want it. We're all of a sudden getting calls from bars and restaurants that are hearing about this product. And we're giving market data to the other two tiers to let them know what to do and what to put on shelves and how to better serve things, rather than it all being a bit of conjecture until it gets to the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And then people look at the sales data and figure out what wins and what doesn't.
Right.
But if you had, warmed up marketing, like kind of a warm lead that goes into the distribution channel, then you're going to have a better chance of selling that product once it reaches the shelves. So I think I don't think this is in any way a destruction or tearing down the three-tier system. If anything, it's refreshing it with new data, using modern techniques of marketing and distribution so that people can get the products that they want and reach new markets.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is so interesting about the shipping element is that a lot of small distilleries have experimental batches that they work on, that it just doesn't make sense to push through the three-tier system, just because there's so little of it, that it's like, okay, well, we have whatever 500 bottles of this. How are we going to distribute this across all of our retail partners or whatever?
That's right.
But it would be that would be like a real quick injection of revenue for them to be able to email out their customer database and say, hey, we've got some special releases that we were going to do distillery only, but because you can't come out, we're going to ship this. And that would be really exciting for me as a spirits enthusiast to have those opportunities kind of opened up to me, because let's face it, man, if Andalusia down around Austin comes out with the distillery only release, I only get down there maybe once every year, every 2 years, I'm going to miss out on a lot, right? But I would maybe buy it if I got the email, and that's good for them and it's good for me as a consumer. So I like that. So
well, and the other thing is it'll probably cut down on muling, right? So for those of you that may not know what muling is, that's asking your buddy or a series of people, say, okay, you're near the distillery, could you go buy this? And then, we're going to transfer it through 2 or 3 different people who are going to travel it across the state or possibly across state lines, just so that people can get a sample of it. That's not something that is a good practice, especially during a pandemic. I mean, the more travel and links in a chain that you have where people have to have in-person connections, that's not a good thing. That's not good for public health. So we need to make sure that the same kind of contactless options that are available to virtually every other manufacturing and retail industry are also available to this manufacturing and retail industry.
I like that. Well, so how do people get involved if they've heard the cry and they say, you know what, I resonate with this, I want to participate? What do you want people to do?
So what we want people to do is visit www.stillstrongtx.com. That URL will immediately direct you over to the Texas Craft Spirits Pack. So make no mistake, this is a political action committee. You will be donating to a committee that will be informing and lobbying on behalf of the craft spirits industry in Texas. What we are asking is, when you go to that page, you will see a list of distilleries that are participating in this. And if you find your favorite distillery in there, you click on their donate button, and we ask that you give around $50, basically the cost of a nice bottle of whiskey, to save this industry. We're trying to get about 5,000 donors across the state of Texas to take part in this, and find your favorite distillery, give through them so that the distillery knows that you have an affinity towards them. And if you don't, just click on the donate button in the upper right corner and just make a donation in general to the pack as a whole. And of course, immediately after that, there is a advocacy form where you can contact your legislator wherever you are. And if you're out of state, you can still send a letter to the governor and lieutenant governor of Texas telling them how much you want to be able to buy Texas spirits from out of state so that Texas can realize that revenue.
Right.
So whether you're a Texan or out of state, you can go to this process, make a donation, and you have an option to write a letter to the representatives who need to make a decision on this in short order. And then just share it with your friends and hashtag, StillStrongTX whenever you talk about it. Make people aware of it. This industry does not have the entrenched dollars to make a huge national impact or huge marketing impact. So we are truly grassroots. This is a true grassroots uphill battle, and it's consumers showing government that we need to have better options for these distillers that help the state.
Yeah. So Spencer represents the producers in the state of Texas. I represent Someone Say Whiskey. So he didn't mention this, but Someone Say Whiskey and my podcast, Bourbon Real Talk, have both signed up as advocates for this. And so if you want to donate to your favorite distillery, feel free to do so. But if you want to donate to Someone Say Whiskey, just scroll down a little bit below there, click on our logo, or you can click on the Bourbon Real Talk logo and you can make a donation there. I was looking at the page earlier today and I thought, God, this is going to cost me so much because I don't want to show favoritism. I'm going to have to donate on all of these different pages for people that I am friends with, Well,
and it's important to know when you're donating, all the money is going to the PAC anyway. All the money is going to the Political Action Committee. It's kind of like your way of saying, well, here's how I found out about it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm donating through this page on behalf of the Political Action Committee. So yeah, there's an organization page for Bourbon Real Talk. I think you could probably give them the URL to let them know exactly where they could click, but it's the same basic donation process. Just give to whomever you wish to give to.
Yeah, but just give, because this is a worthy cause and it'll have a really big positive impact on the state of Texas and spirits in general. We got to lead the way.
Yeah.
Oh, is there anything else we need to share with the people before we wrap it up?
Not at the moment. Just to continue to donate, advocate, and share. That's what we need people to do. Like I said, it's a grassroots effort. That means that we need the grassroots to stand up. And look, in the age of COVID, and I want to say this specifically, if anybody from the governor's office happens to be watching, this is a really hard time to govern. It's extremely difficult. You're hearing cries from almost every industry across the board. Especially healthcare and all these other things. I just think it's important for people to think and remember that in this particular case, a distilling industry, which typically was not part of Texas communities, has come to the aid of Texas communities, and they deserve the right to be seen in the same regard as hospitals, as food banks, as people who are making PPE and transitioned their fabric lines into the production of PPE and scrubs and things like that. This is the same type of thing that is happening in the distilling industry, yet we're being restricted under old laws that are 100 years old.
Sure.
So please help us and help the state of Texas.
So Governor Abbott, be the hero that we know that you can be.
That's right.
All we're asking.
Yep.
All right. Well, if you want more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can get that at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube /Bourbon Real Talk. You can look us up on Instagram, although I don't do a lot over there. I don't really understand Instagram, but anyway, I try. And you can always email me. You can find me in Someone Say Whiskey. I'm on there all day, every day for some reason. I love you guys. And if you woke up this morning and you were unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you. I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk. This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest of purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com/shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening.